thanks for coming and thanks for inviting me. I've got 15 minutes and I want to go through 3 ways that I think craft can be really useful in activism. When I say craft, it's because I'm Scouse, so I mean craft for the Southerners, craftivism, in case people are like, what the hell is she talking about? So I want to talk about how craft helps with slow activism, helps you think more deeply, think more critically, be more mindful, all of the stuff G said, wherever he is. A lot of that you can do while you're making. And then I want to talk about gentle protest, as in how do we work with power holders rather than against them in a humble way, like Assam said, to get them, to encourage them to use their power for good and be part of the solution rather than we're the only solution and they're part of the problem. It should be what Sophie said. It should be that we're all part of the solution and we can all be part of the problem that we need to address. And then the third one is I want to talk about how craftivism can be super useful as a way to intrigue people. So intrigue and activism, rather than just screaming at people and saying, this is a big issue, we need your help now. How do we attract people? How do we intrigue people? How do we encourage people to think for themselves? Because we all know that we're stubborn human beings and it lasts much longer if we've decided to change our ways or out the way that we think rather than being bullied into it. So they're the 3 ways that I think craft can be particularly useful in activism, but also bear in mind that for me, craftivism is one tool in the activism toolkit. Sadly, it's not going to save the world on its own. It's one tool in the kit. It shouldn't be seen as a movement, which lots of people talk about the craftivism movement. We don't have a march movement. We don't have a petition movement. So I think we need to scrap that saying and say this is a tool. And when we have an issue that we want to address, we open up the toolkit as campaigners and say, what do we need to do? Do we need a quick stunt outside an embassy because a law is just about to be passed and we need to get out there now and get the media to address it? Do we need more long, slow burning community action with communities that might take years to get a social local health centre and do that? Do we need to target a certain audience that are more influential than others and work with them in a particular way that is relevant to them? Is it shareholder activism? Is it a march? Is it all these different things? Is it lobbying your MP? We need all of them. But I found that as an activist, I grew up in the 80s in a very white working class area in Liverpool called Everton, and was squatting from the age of 3. And we had people who we were squatting to save social housing that were going to be demolition to build a park that no one wanted and would have split up communities and made the area more unsafe. And we had placards outside for a bit of humour, which is good for sustainability, where we said if the Iron Lady lived here, she'd rust. Because you need to have a laugh sometimes, don't you, and not just cry all the time. So I learned from a very early age where campaigning could win, where it could be effective and where it could be completely ineffective, and we would just use an anger to scream at people and not channel it to do effective campaigning. And working for Oxfam and DFID and different charities, as an introvert, I really like reflecting, and I think it's really important in activism, which is bloody hard work, that we can't just go in with anger and a foggy head and go, we just need to do stuff, because we end up with just picking the low-hanging fruit of this is the way we've always done activism and this is how we're going to do it, which people have mentioned. But there was no options for people to say, should we just slow down here and think a bit more critically? Is there any tools we can use to channel our anger in a way that is part of a kind world and not just treat people badly? And I think if we want the world to be beautiful, kind and just, then our activism should be beautiful, kind and just. And a lot of it isn't, and a lot of it wasn't 10 years ago. And I picked up a cross-stitch kit as a burnt-out activist because I was travelling the country with one of my jobs, mobilising people, and I was going to Glasgow. And I used to love to paint, but couldn't paint on trained. Pendolinos doing watercolours, not a good mix, is it? So I picked up a cross-stitch kit and immediately noticed that separating the thread forced me to slow down. It made me mindful of how shaky my hands were, how tight my shoulders were. Doing a repetitive action that I was having to do made me regulate my breathing because I had very shallow breathing. I was like, bloody hell, I'm tense and burnt out and hadn't been asked how I was feeling by any of my activist friends or colleagues. And this using a tool, using your head, hands and heart, I thought was just magic. And could I help bring handicraft, as in soft paper craft or sewing, into activism to help us think, to help us be strategic, to help us empathise with perpetrators as much as those directly affected by the negative impacts, which is bloody difficult when we just want to demonise them. So using that time, and all of my stuff is over words, so you sew over a word or you write a word or a message and you really meditate on what that is, because you're not going to physically make something you don't agree with. So you're really going to make it go, and do I agree with this? What does this actually mean? And I have little craft of thought questions in each of my Craftivism kits with juicy questions in. There's always 3, depending on what the objective is for each project. And it might be things like, what are your values and how do you thread them through everything that you do? It's a pretty difficult, uncomfortable question, but using the comfort of craft, where you're using your hands in a slow, quiet space on your own or with others, you can really challenge yourself to say, hang on a minute, if I'm telling them to change, can I be that change I want to see in the world? Which makes me more credible in my campaigning, attracts more people. And it means that I can say, look, I'm doing it, so you can do it too. With the gentle protest, we make gifts for power holders. So this afternoon, we're going to be making positive notes, like these little things. A bit of sparkle always helps. And it's to say to power holders, whether it's politicians or board members or CEOs or journalists or bloggers, or anyone that we think could do better in their role and might be more part of the problem than the solution, we want to say, I've made you a gift to say, I believe you could do a brilliant job in your role that you've got a lot of responsibility in. I think you could be a brilliant person. You are a brilliant person. But I want to encourage you to be part of that solution. So here's a positive note. Or with board members, we said to the board members of Marks and Spencer's, we embroidered bespoke handkerchiefs for them. So we Googled everything about them, and I gave every craftivist a board member, there's only 14, and I said, look at what colours they wear, look at, are they a trustee of somewhere? Try and figure out what makes them tick. Are they shy? Are they very flamboyant? Do they like talking a lot? Are they more introverted? Try and figure out a bit about them as a person, and then make a bespoke handkerchief for them saying, don't blow it, use your power for good. We know you've got a difficult job, but we really want to encourage you to be part of the change that we want to see in the world, of a more beautiful, kind and just place. And put a timeless quote on from someone that you think they'd like, whether it's a musician talking about social change or someone who was a trustee of Kew Gardens. We talked about flourishing on their handkerchief and how they could flourish in their role. And then we wrote a handwritten message to go alongside these timeless gifts that was about the living wage, saying, as Marks and Spencer's customers, we love you, but we're shocked that you don't pay the living wage. While I was stitching your gift, I was thinking about what a difficult job you might have, but what an amazing opportunity you have to pioneer the living wage. You're so influential in the retail space in the UK and elsewhere. What an amazing thing it could be for you to do. And I was also thinking about how bloody difficult it is living on minimum wage, especially if you have a family, what I would do, what my friends do, how difficult it is, how it's not very dignified, and how we love M&S staff. So we want them to have a safe, unstressful life. And then we said, and it also makes business sense. It helps with staff retention, it helps with PR, it helps with so many different ways of why this is good for business. So we had the strategy in terms of saying this is good for your work, but the emotional element saying this is also good for you as a human being. And we hand-delivered them at the AGM. And for 3 years, they'd been ignoring any meetings about the living wage. And we got our meetings because we did it in a very humble, small, delicate way. And for a year, we had very boring, non-crafty meetings with them to build up trust, to say this is where we think you can actually realistically make a difference. And just before the next AGM, they announced they were paying the living wage to 50,000 staff. So we went back and we said, well done. We didn't say, well done us, and tweet it to the world. We said, well done you. Isn't this brilliant? That's so great what you've done. Be really good if you could be accredited as well. And we have those discussions with them. But it was very much about us saying, this is an issue that's not about us. It's not about whether we win or lose. It's about showing solidarity with people not on a living wage or above. But it's also about having the best hopes in those power holders to say, we believe you're a good person and we want you to show it. Not, we think you're awful and we're going to topple you so someone else just as bad can pop up. And the third one is the Intrigue and Activism. And this is one. There's lots of different projects. So if you're intrigued, you can read the book and have a look at more of the projects outside. But one way, again, to look at activism and look at this toolkit and think what's missing, there isn't a slow form to meditate and think on your own or with people. There isn't a form to build critical friendships with power holders rather than be aggressive enemies. And I also feel like there isn't a chance for people to be intrigued. I'm an introvert, and I did a TEDx talk called Activism Needs Introverts. This just had over 1 million hits this week, which is good. And as introverts and highly sensitive people, you can get really overwhelmed by big posters. So my sister's quite extreme extrovert. She loves a big poster. She loves a big banner. She likes big marchers. She likes capital letters and exclamation marks that tell her what to do or to rally her up. For a lot of people, introverts are a third to the half of the world's population. Quite a lot of people. And whether you're an introvert or not, I feel like activism doesn't intrigue people, doesn't get people excited. And I want people to be excited about how the world is gorgeous in so many ways. And we just heard a lot of reasons it's gorgeous today. But it can be more gorgeous. So how do we engage people that aren't like us, taking a Saturday and paying to come to an event for the whole day? How do we engage people without judging them or demonizing them or making them feel like they have to join us? Because if they don't join us, they're not on the right side of history. We need everyone to be part of it. And people are busy. So again, looking at that activism toolkit, I can't do everything. So I was thinking, where can I be of use? And I love Fashion Revolution. Does anyone know that? It's a campaign organisation. Amazing. Fashion Revolution Week is coming up in a couple of weeks. And they have an incredible hashtag that's just called, that you just do, you at the clothes company that you're wearing the clothes from on Instagram or Twitter or wherever. And you just hashtag, who made my clothes at Zara or whoever. And those companies know that you're a customer. It's often younger people that buy their clothes, that might do shopping hauls. So they're very influential amongst their friends who buy cheap clothes. So it looks bad if they don't reply and say, this person made your clothes. And for every post that's made in the fashion industry, they think that's about 10,000 people. So when you think, what's little old me going to do with one tweet? Represents about 10,000 people for them, so that's quite a big number. And I thought, I love this, it's positive, it's encouraging, it's saying to people who love fashion, you're allowed to love fashion, but also think intentionally about where you're putting your money, and do you have to buy all these clothes, and be more curious about who made them, will they last, the whole system. But they weren't doing stuff offline. So I contacted the founders, who are lovely, and I do stuff with them anyway, and said, I've got this little idea to do offline actions that then link to you. What about shop dropping little mini scrolls that are handwritten, very beautiful for people to find, which is the opposite of shoplifting. So you go into shops that you think could improve, and then you just drop one in the pocket of a shirt or a bag, and it's very sneaky. And if anyone finds you, you just go, oh, sorry, that was by accident, or you say it wasn't you. And they're all on beautiful paper, and I have 3 different coloured threads. So a lot of this is about colour as well. How do we intrigue people with beautiful colours, which are purple, turquoise, or mauve, which are seen as luxury colours in our history? All of the paper's very dimply. It's not cheap, nasty paper. I get people to write in a fountain pen, ideally, or a gel pen if you can't do that. And you handwrite a message, and it's picking one of 3. So I've worked with Futera, who do sustainable communications, who are amazing, to come up with 3 messages. So as a maker, you pick one of them that resonates with you the most. but you write it as it is. So you take ownership of the message you're writing. You do it in your neatest handwriting, nice and slow, because whoever reads it can see if you've rushed it or not. It's very personal. And one of the messages that you might open, all of them say, please open me, all lowercase, no exclamation marks, smiley face and a kiss. And it'll say, if clothes could talk, what would they tell? Stories of how they were made with love, joy, and care, or sadness, tragedy, and heartbreak. What would your clothes say to you? And then at the bottom, you just put @FashRev, so people aren't disempowered by going, whoa, that's a big question, I have no idea. You put @Fashion Revolution at the bottom, so people can Google that and find out more, because they've got brilliant resources. And it just plants little seeds and says to people, let's be curious. What is the story behind what you're wearing? Wouldn't it be more fun if someone said, I liked your dress, and you could say, oh, the woman down the road made it for me, or have a little story behind it and you know it's going to last. So that project was not about getting 50,000 people the living wage. It was about amongst the picture of activism for people who are busy with full-time jobs or other things to do. Can they make a few little scrolls? They all have embossed scissors in. So again, that texture, using 2 or more senses, means that you engage more deeply in the issue. The colours more intriguing. Our book is yellow, which is very hopeful. We don't use reds and blacks, which is good for quick attention, but not for long term. And it's about saying, here's all these different projects you could do, whether you are working 3 jobs and you can only do a few scrolls a night, or whether on your commute you could stitch a letter to your MP to build a relationship with them. But you're seeing yourself as part of the solution. You're one jigsaw piece doing a few different things within where your circle of influence is. And you can't do all of it. And this isn't going to solve the world on its own, but it is a way to say this is another tool in the activism toolkit that I think is valid. It's worked, whether it's for the maker changing themselves through the power of the process, whether it's through gift given to power holders, or whether it's through objects that you put out in the public sphere to intrigue people. I think it's a really good way of doing sustainable, creative, positive activism. And I hope I can convert you all today.